because it's actually down to me that we're not able to be at the university today, and I'm very sorry about that. So yes, we're going to talk about co-production, and I'm just acknowledging, because I've started recording, that lots of people amongst you have never heard of it. That is not unusual at all. So for the people that might be watching this back, you know, you may be in the same position, that this is quite new to you. But like I said, yeah, you're not alone in that. So we definitely this morning hope that you will have an understanding, especially of the principles. You know, what are the principles of co-production? And of course, how does it link with social work and social work practice? And then, you know, if you were writing about it, well, what are the strengths and the limitations of this approach? And does it also present ethical issues for social workers when they're actually trying to incorporate it into their practice? And it absolutely does. You will not be surprised to hear. Okay, so as usual, we want to know the history, don't we? We want to know the origins of these approaches that we're looking at each week. So this is really quite interesting. You know, when I did a bit of research and I wanted to find out who actually came up with this idea, where did it come from? So it goes back to the 70s and 80s, and also the United States. And there were two people that are credited with developing the approach. And one of them is called Elinor Ostrom, and she's a law academic. And then there is another person called Edgar Kahn, who's described as an activist. So back in those times, Ostrom and her colleagues were, so this is kind of familiar. This is, you know, sadly, we could say, well, has life changed that much? Because what they were complaining about was there was so much bureaucracy, and this was in the police service. So we're more familiar with local authority social work, but they were finding that there was too much bureaucracy in the police services, and alongside that, that crime was increasing, particularly in the urban area where they were. And part of the problem from their perspective is that the officers had become too remote from the community. So rather than being on the beats, on the streets, you know, in the community, the officers were mostly spending time in their cars. So inevitably, they'd become more detached from the people that they were serving. And the argument from Elinor Ostrom and her colleagues is, well, you're missing out then, aren't you? Because you are not getting, you know, valuable, say, information from people in the community who in themselves are a valuable resource. They have so much knowledge and expertise. But if you have no relationship with them, if you are distant from them, then, you know, you're losing out on all of their knowledge and expertise. So what their conclusion was is that the quality of the relationships between the people providing the services and the people using the services, or the citizens, was the most important thing, because, yeah, the services rely as much on the knowledge and expertise of both the citizens and the professionals. You cannot have one or the other. That would be the argument. You need both. So as a result of that, they developed this term co-production, and it's describing the potential in relationships between the people that provide the services. They call them the regular producers. So that can be the street level police officers, it can be school teachers, it can be health workers, and we can add in there, and it can be social workers. And then say the citizens, the people who want to then be transformed by the service. Because what did people want in their communities? What do we want where we live? Do we want to live in safe spaces, in safe communities? Of course, the answer is yes, all of us want that. Do we want our children to have the best education that they can? Well, we do. We want good schools, don't we, in our communities? And do we want good health services, so that we can be as healthy as possible? And the answers to all of that are yes. So what they're arguing is you've got some shared aims then, haven't you? As in, they're talking about synergy between what is it the government wants and what is it the people wants, that the people want, and how that can occur. So I'll give you a modern day example, although this modern day example has had its problems, but a modern day example could be the pandemic. Because if we go back to 2020, we did not know what COVID was, but we were very, very worried about it. We could see that it was killing lots of people in other countries because the wave of COVID, it didn't first come to the UK, did it? It went to other countries, and we could see the devastating impact that COVID was having on, populations in other parts of the world. So our government had to ask us as citizens to cooperate and to have a lockdown, didn't it? And we mostly, I think you got people that were agreeing with the government because the government and the people wanted the same things, which were to preserve life and not to see the spread of COVID. So that would be a kind of modern day example of co-production, where you've got the synergy or the consensus between the people, which is us, and in this case it was the government, wasn't it, with the lockdown. I mean, okay, things have changed and there's been lots of criticism of the government's behaviour about not following its own rules, etc., etc. But that for me is probably the best example I could give you about, well, that there's an agreement then, isn't there? There's a consensus between what the powers that be would want and maybe what we would want, and then we would all support that and come together. So Edgar Kahn also wrote a book which really embodies what are the universal core values of co-production, and his book is called No More Throwaway People. And I don't know if you remember when Nathaniel, he only had a limited amount of time with you, but he talked to you about systems theory and ecological approaches, and he mentioned Bronfenbrenner. And Bronfenbrenner had the same kind of mindset, didn't he, about everybody, every young person matters. So this whole concept about, no more throwaway people, that for us, if we want to relate that to a social work value, it's about human rights, isn't it? It's saying everybody is unique and everybody is of value and of unique worth. And that is something I think I spoke to you about, many weeks ago when we started the module. So that is our history of co-production. But let's come more sort of up to date with how it fits into our world of social work. So let's have a look at that. So again, I know that you looked at the Care Act in the law module, but you wouldn't have had the chance to go into all parts of the Care Act. But actually, co-production is recognised in the statutory guidance that supports the Care Act. So we have got a definition, which is very helpful for us in social work, isn't it? And it says that co-production is when an individual influences the support and services they receive, or when groups of people get together to influence the way that services are designed, commissioned, and delivered. So that is what the statutory guidance supporting the Care Act has to say about co-production. So the idea is that we need to support the people that we're working with, because we don't want to just make decisions, for them. But we want to work with people. That's been really person-centered, isn't it? Working with people so that they actually participate in the decisions that affect their lives. So the question is, well, how do we do that? So 2 examples you can see at the bottom of the screen or the slide. Well, we would need to make sure that we're actively involving people who we could call experts by experience or people with lived experience. And if you think back to how did you come onto this course, and some of you may have been interviewed by some of the social work team from the university, people that are working as social workers, but also people with lived experience. They might have been involved in the recruitment process for you, which may be now about a year ago or so before you started the actual degree course. Okay, and also we can have people who are experts by experience involved in producing information, contributing to policies and contributing to procedures. So we're going to have a look at a lot of examples today to see what that looks like in practice to help us to understand it all a bit better. Okay. So there is an organisation that you will hear a lot from today. We call them TLAP. So what that means is think local, act personal, but we shorten that to TLAP. And this is their definition of co-production. So they say that when a person who uses services is involved as an equal partner in designing the support and services they receive, co-production recognises that people who use social care services and their families have knowledge and experience that can be used to help make services better, not only for themselves, but for other people who need social care. So that is what Think Local, Act Personal believe co-production is and should be. So I said at the beginning that we needed to understand what are some of the principles that underpin co-production. So first of all, if we go back to Hahn and Ostrom, they talked about people themselves being assets in communities. So we're recognizing that people themselves are a very important resource that we work with. This is a very strengths-based approach, and that you can see that in the second point, because it says what we are doing. Think about the Mental Capacity Act as well. We're recognizing people's ability and capabilities, and we're building on people's own capabilities. And it's all about being relationship-based. So hopefully you can already see that co-production is a very person-centered and relationship-based approach. It has to be, doesn't it? Because the first part of this was about the police officers being too remote and not having relationships, and yet co-production is about relationships. So this is saying good relationships are two-way. They're not one-way, they're two-way, aren't they? They are reciprocal, in other words. And also with co-production, if we're working with people, they may also like to link up with people who might also have similar issues going on in their lives. So we talk about peer support, and if we think about all of you, hopefully you find each other a support, in the friendships that you've developed with one another, and you are peers. So the same thing applies, doesn't it? That when we're working with people in co-production, it's also about people coming together, maybe with some shared lived experience, possibly. What happens in co-production is we kind of get away from the more traditional models of, oh, this person is the professional, this person is, receiving services. So it talks about blurring the boundaries between the people that are delivering the service and the people that are receiving services. So what we should be as social workers is facilitators. Rather than delivering services to people, we're facilitating, and I'll use the word enabling people, in terms of the services that they're receiving. And there's something here about power, which is something we're very interested in, especially when we consider an anti-oppressive perspective. So this is an anti-oppressive really principle, isn't it? Because the power should be balanced between people who receive the support or get the support and the people who support them. So it's about sharing the power. And I know that we've talked a lot about that already when we've looked at, various approaches, but we can see that, embedded in this approach. So it comes from an anti oppressive perspective in that sense. Okay, what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to enable sound so that you can hear this. Just make sure I've got that share sound. There we go. And I have got a podcast for us to listen to. So I don't think it matters if I go off screen, because you're not going to be viewing an image. But what you will be doing is just listening to two people having a conversation. So if you remember, I've talked a little bit already about TLAP, Think Local, Act Personal. So they have produced a podcast, and it helps us to understand how co-production can be used in social work and social care. So maybe if I just stop sharing this screen, and then possibly if I can share a new screen, that's probably going to help. Let's see if that works. So I have it set up. There we go. So what you should see now is a black screen with a little white shape with the minutes for the podcast. So hopefully everybody can see that. And I'll do a little sound check with you just to make sure that you can hear it. So if I press play now, and I'll pause it and I'll check with you that you can hear it. Could you hear the music?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so if everybody just wants to listen to this, and if you want to make any notes as well, and we'll just have some reflections after we've heard it. It's just about 7 minutes. There we go.
Hi, I'm Kat Duncan-Rees, co-production advisor at Think Local, Act Personal, otherwise known as TLAP. I'd like to welcome you to this, our latest podcast. I'm here with Sally Percival, chair of the TLAP partnership, and today we're going to talk about co-production and the art of conversation. First, Sally, would you like to introduce yourself, say a bit about who you are and your experiences of social care?
Yeah, hi Kat, I'm Sally Percival and I'm mother and stepmother to 2 adult children, Alex and Hannah, both with care and support needs. And until recently, I was also caring for my mum who lived with dementia, but sadly she passed away last year. So I've got quite a lot of experience of dealing with the health and social care systems.
Yes, sounds like it. We hear a lot about the importance of co-production these days, but do you think you could start by explaining what it is?
Well, what's important about co-production is it's a way of working based on a really equal relationship between people who use services and people that are responsible for them. It's really based on the principle that people who use services are best placed to help design it. They work alongside professionals as partners in the delivery, design, and, start right from the beginning, working hand in hand.
I hear that, and to me, it sounds a lot like common sense. It sounds like that's just how people should be working. Is that your experience?
Oh, if only it was, Kat. We have to bear in mind that what co-production isn't. And it isn't about being asked to fill in a questionnaire. It's not about being asked to attend events. It's not about being asked to attend event as a guest. It's about really coming together as equals, as I've said.
So, bearing that in mind, people coming together as equals, that sharing of power, equal relationships, what difference do you think co-production can make? And do you have any specific examples of when it's worked for you?
Well, I think it can make an absolute huge difference to everybody. And yes, I've got some good examples. For example, when my son Alex was younger, he was given a one-size-fits-all service, and it just didn't work for him. Different people would turn up that Alex didn't know. And continuity is so important for someone with autism. So he would hide under his bed and refuse to go out. But when we took control and when we started to organise our own care and support, that completely changed. We sat down, had a good conversation with our social worker and with Alex, and suddenly he went from a very lonely, sad little boy to going out, doing things that he really enjoyed. And that was all about working together with our professionals.
And that's quite a significant change. And power is a huge issue in that, isn't it? How do you think that we get to that point where, more people understand the importance of sharing that power?
Well, I believe it's all about developing relationships and having really good conversations. And, that takes time. Trust takes time to build up. But if you don't talk to people, you can't build up that trust between you. Sharing power equally is definitely at the heart of co-production.
So can you expand on that a bit? Tell me a little bit more what you mean.
Yeah, well, giving people who use services an equal opportunity to sit at the table and make decisions about their own lives is just fundamental. It means building up people's confidence and developing their skills so they can participate fully. Within a work setting, it means that everyone is there on an equal basis. That might be staff, managers and trustees. And we're glad that some organisations are really taking steps to do this already.
Okay, so that sounds to me like there's quite a lot of potential risk in there. And, I hear that a lot when I'm out and about. So what would you say to organisations or people that are worried about the risks?
Well, there is risks, but actually you can risk assess somebody out of a life. And what's really important is to have those conversations with people. So can I give you an example of where our council was very worried about my stepdaughter, Hannah, going swimming. And they actually decided it probably wasn't worth her going swimming. But swimming was what kept her really healthy, safe and well. She actually really loved it. So we sat down with the swimming pool manager and the council, and we had a really good conversation about how to get over that barrier. And it was actually quite simple. She put on plastic Crocs so that she was stable when she was walking. She then was taken by a hoist to the side of the pool and put in, which meant that it was safe and that she could enjoy her swimming again.
So it really is about thinking through what matters to the people involved in any given situation, and thinking a bit creatively about how you approach that.
Kat, can you say something about the resources that TLAP has to support co-production?
Yes, I can. I should add, Think Local Act Personal is completely committed to co-production, and as an organisation it runs as a thread through everything we do. The National Co-Production Advisory Group work very closely with the team through the whole work programme. There's also loads of resources on the website, from the top tips to the ladder of co-production, all of which are downloadable. But most importantly is our new approach to how to do personalised care and support, making it real. And that has co-production at its heart, and that can be used for the basis of good conversations about making things better.
And of course, the National Co-Production Advisory Group, as we call ourselves, NCAG, is available for advice and guidance to anyone who would like a bit of support around making it real. We're a group of people with lived experience, really dedicated and passionate about personalised care, because we know from experience that it can really improve health and well-being.
That's great, thank you. Have you got any last thoughts you'd like to reflect on before we close?
Yeah, I think my takeaway message for everyone is that co-production is more than just a buzzword. It is common sense. When services are genuinely co-produced, they work better because they make the most of that shared expertise of the professionals who work there and people who have experience of using them. And you can start today everywhere by having different types of conversation.
That's really well put. Thank you, Sally. And I think my reflection is that it's not rocket science and there's no magic formula. I think people are waiting for this magic formula to do co-production, and it's not there because it is just about relationships and values and conversations.
Absolutely, Kat, so true.
So what I would urge people to do is to keep an eye or an ear out for our next podcast, which will be coming soon, more about personalisation and thinking differently and social care. And do sign up to the Think Local Act Personal newsletter via the website and express an interest in some of the work that TLAP and NCAG are doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing. And I've got 2 questions before we go back to the slides. So you can either speak or put it in the chat if you want. So Sally was the main person who was speaking. Why did she think the art of conversation was so important? Anybody got any thoughts about that? What difference does that make? Yeah, Emily, it can increase confidence. Emily, do you think that's particularly for people that are using services? Do you think that's professionals, or do you think it's a bit of both? Yeah, it's true, isn't it? Because that, again, Emily, it sort of embodies the fact that co-production is both parties, people, however many people we're talking about, working together. And there was something that she said about those conversations that helps to, okay, and maybe I'll turn this question around. What is it about co-production that makes it relationship based? Anybody want to try and answer that?
It empowers people because it gives them equal opportunities to participate, in the decision making that concerns them.
Definitely, it definitely does, doesn't it? It is about empowering people to be involved in decision making. So what is happening? Yeah, Jennifer, makes people feel heard. That is so important. It's about the voices of people, isn't it? So what is happening to power in these relationships between organisations and people? What's going on there with the power? Who's holding that power? How's that power being distributed in those relationships? What do you think?
Both the people receiving the care, the support, it's a balanced thing,
Yeah.
between the person that is being supported or receiving the care and the expert that is supporting the person. Is all balanced, it's not just
so what you're saying,
one-sided.
yeah. So Majanity, you're talking about the power being balanced, and Emily, I think Emily's put it's the professional and the service users both having power. So that's right, isn't it? They were talking about power being shared. That's one of the things they were saying. And then my second question for all of you is Sally said sometimes you can risk assess somebody out of a life. I don't know if you remember her saying that. What does she mean by that? What does she mean you can risk assess somebody out of a life? Anybody want to take that on? She did give a specific example as well, but yeah, just can anyone explain that? What's she talking about?
Could you say, I think we spoke about it last week, that life is sort of full of risk. You can't completely eradicate any chance of risk. And if you do that, you're not really left with much of a life, because just walking out of your house could be a risk, if that makes sense.
That's perfect, Jennifer. That's exactly what she's saying. And she used the example of her stepdaughter who really likes swimming, didn't she? And basically the leisure centre were concerned about the risks to Hannah, her stepdaughter, and saying, oh no, that's too risky. Imagine what could happen to her. But the family was saying, well, actually, if she wore certain footing, and if the hoist was used, and if all these things were put in place, there is no reason why Hannah can't go for a swim. But as you said, Jennifer, if they just denied her that and said, no, I'm sorry, we can't do that, then it really is diminishing her quality of life, isn't it? And the things that she'd like to do. And the fact is, yes, of course, everything is risky, and it's okay for us to take risks in our lives anyway. Otherwise, none of us would do anything, would we? We'd never go out of the door, that kind of thing. So yes, what we have this term that we use a lot called risk averse. So we have to be careful that we don't deny people opportunities. Otherwise, we ourselves and our services and our agencies have a tendency, if you like, to become risk averse. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back now to the slides. I think I've got the right page. Let's see if that comes up. Yeah, there we go. That's where we were. So we'll just carry on a little bit more. Oh, has it jumped? Yes, it has. We've got the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. A bit of a mouthful. We call them NICE, and they have done a lot of work around co-production as well. And exactly what Emily was saying about making decisions. No, Jennifer, actually, about enabling people to make decisions. So what is all this about? We've got some guidelines here And it's about respect, isn't it? Respecting that people have got a right to make their own decisions. And if we think about capacity, a bit like the Mental Capacity Act, we just don't sort of make value judgments and assumptions about people, you know, having maybe limited capacity to actually make their own decisions. Because if we make decisions in our lives, we feel much more in control, don't we? And particularly for people who are assessed under the Care Act, they would like, you know, it would be better for people, which was kind of discussed in the podcast, to be able to have greater control about their own care and support needs. And we should be, as services, as social workers, you know, we should always be trying to actively involve people in all the decisions that affect their lives. It says we should provide support to people. I think what one of you said, it may, I'm not sure who, about people being heard. And that's what we're talking about people being able to express their views. It says their preferences, their aspirations. And again, this is about adults and about their care and support needs, isn't it? That's what the NICE guidance is. And then we need to identify what it is that people want and record, you know, that person's wishes. And also issues around their communication needs. So we're just going to look at this a little bit more. It's mentioning the Mental Capacity Act. It says, well, actually, if the person does lack capacity, these are the kind of things which we are familiar with, because it's a little bit from, you know, similar discussions we had last week, which is using plain language, you know, make that communication personal to the person, really encourage and enable people to be actively involved in their own care and support. And if they do have an advocate, a third party who's speaking with them and on their behalf, make sure there's enough time for their, you know, views to be put across. So that might mean slowing things down. So I'm going to ask you again, you may not have heard of this person who's mentioned here, Clenton Farquharson, okay? Now, you may not have heard of him, but you might want to look him up. He's done lots of things on YouTube, and he actually comes from Birmingham, so he's quite local to us, and he is an inspirational person. And Ceri, who's joining us online at 11 o'clock, he was her mentor. He might still be her mentor. And so Clenton ended up with lifelong disabilities, because he was, I think he was like a security person, and he tried to intervene when a woman was being sexually assaulted, and he got so badly beaten that he now is a wheelchair user. And his story, so I'll see if I put it on Aula, but if not, I think I will, because it's really worth listening to where Clenton's coming from. So as a result of his injuries, he was very angry about life and what had happened to him. And social worker was, you know, assigned to work with him, and he really didn't want to know and wouldn't really answer the door and let her in, and kind of shouted expletives if she came round. The social worker just wouldn't give up and just, you know, understood his pain and his anger and just kept going. And that kind of formed a really good relationship. So he's very, very positive about the difference, you know, professionals can make. But he's such a strong advocate for people with lived experience. So this is what he's saying. He says people's experiences in adult social care should be, shouldn't it? Should be the highest priority in adult social care services. And he says it's, you know, it's not just about supporting a life, but it's about providing a service. Because I was listening to Clenton a year ago, and he said it's not like a plant, is it? If you have a plant, you might just do the basics, you know, like watering the plant. And he's saying, you know, you don't just do the basics with people, make sure they're fed and they're watered. It's much more than that. And it is about relationships. But he would put that a lot better than I have. So he says, you know, sometimes it's about using an advocate, about making sure people do have enough time, extra time, maybe using larger print for people, maybe thinking about your environment. Is the lighting good enough? You know, all of those things can make a difference, can't they, to people? So in a minute, we're going to watch a video, which again is TLAP, Think Local, Act Personal. And there's a really important concept in this video, which was mentioned in the podcast, but you may not have kind of grasped it the first time around. And it's called the ladder of co-production. So what they're going to explain in the video, what do they mean by the ladder of co-production. So it says, there's lots of ways that people can be involved in co-production, but it's not necessarily all co-production. So this video is, what co-production is and what it isn't. And clearly, if you're at the bottom rung of the ladder, I don't think we would accept that coercion is co-production. So the little video, it just shows different types of participation, and they've used football as a way to explain it. And the people that are in the video come from the National Co-Production Advisory Group, and that is made up of people with care and support needs and carers as well. So hopefully, will it play for me? Let's have a look. Oh, yes.
We are members of the National Co-Production Advisory Group, which is made up of people with care and support needs and carers. We are supported by TLAP, and we promote the use of co-production in health and social care. We are committed to making sure that personalised services and support based in the community become a reality for everyone. There's a lot to consider when involving people, so this film is to help you identify the different approaches. People can be involved in many ways, ranging from coercion to co-production. We will explain 7 of them, and to make it more fun and easier to understand, we'll use football as examples. It can be football or any other sport, really. So let's start with coercion. What's that?
Coercion. This is the bottom rung of the ladder, in which the person who uses services is not involved in a scheme's design or delivery and is instead encouraged to participate through forceful tactic. It's like when a player is told he has to play in a different position, otherwise he's not playing at all.
I'd like to know about educating.
Educating. The person who uses services is helped to understand the scheme's design and delivery, so they gain the relevant knowledge about it. That is all that is done at this stage. This is like when the players and the team are given information about certain styles of football that will help them improve their skills.
What about informing?
Informing. Too frequently, the emphasis when informing people who use services is a one-way flow of information. There is no channel for feedback or power for negotiation. It's like when managers tell players how to play without asking them about their experiences and what they have learnt in previous games.
What about consultation?
Consultation. People who use services may be asked to fill in surveys and attend meetings. However, this may be tokenistic if they don't have the power to influence or affect change. It's like when managers ask players for advice on what tactics to use, but may or may not use it.
How is engagement different?
Engagement. Compared to consultation, the person who uses services is given more opportunities to express their views and to share in the decision making, but they are not involved in delivering the service, the product, or the policy. It's a little bit like when players and managers have pre-season meetings to discuss the season ahead and all the matches that they're going to play.
What does co-design mean?
Co-design. Based on the experiences and ideas, the person who uses a service is involved in the design of the new service, but they are not involved in delivering it. It's like when football players and their managers plan tactics for the match, but the player is a substitute and doesn't play.
And what about co-production?
Co-production. This is the top rung of the ladder. Co-production is a relationship where people who use services and carers work together with professionals on an equal basis to design and in some cases deliver the service. It could also be a product or policy. It is built on the principle that those who use a service are best placed to help design it. It's like when football players and their managers plan tactics together by using their knowledge and experience. As a result, they are more organised, play better, and are a good team.
Thank you, Sally and Kieran, for explaining. We now know that co-production is in fact the best way to work and is the goal to reach. I hope this film has helped you to understand the different ways people can be involved. Bye, and thanks for watching.
Okay, so that video is really helpful because it's just breaking down the concept of this ladder of co-production. You can even see there's a little picture there, the heart's ladder of participation. So this is quite a universal concept that is understood in different parts of the world, that again, you know, people that are committed to doing co-production and what that looks like. And hopefully, I mean, if you were writing about it in the assignment, you know, you would definitely want to mention some of the concepts within co-production. This would be a helpful one. But even if you're not, it's just important for us to think about, well, what does that look like? What does co-production look like in social work, in social care? You know, maybe when you're going on your placements, and what actually isn't co-production as well. So hopefully you're going to, you know, become more and more familiar. I'm just going to see if it will let me now go to the next slide without repeating the video. There we go. No, not quite. There we go. So we've looked at a few examples, and now this one again, we will look at children, but at the moment we've got another adult example, and this is adult safeguarding, and this is about complex best interest decision making in meetings around adult safeguarding. And these are principles that we should adopt about good practice. It is always better to meet people before a meeting, people who are using services. It's anxiety provoking to go into formal meetings. It's much better, you know, in your planning to meet the person face to face before you go into that formal situation. It's so important that professionals are good at explaining to people, you know, what are these policies, breaking it down into language that people understand, including things that can be very daunting for people when we talk about legal requirements and our statutory duties, but we don't want to use lots of jargon. You know, we want to make that as user-friendly as possible. So added to that, it's talking about, what about the information that you give people? Is it easy read information? Does it explain the purpose and the process of the meeting? And obviously have a conversation with the person to make sure that they do understand it, and you know, don't just do that once with people, and slow it down, as it said in one of the previous slides. We should always think about choice, shouldn't we? So how much do people feel that they can take part in the meeting? Do they want to be in the whole meeting? Do they want to come in person? It's much better if they can come in person. A lot of our meetings, though, are done virtually since the pandemic. You know, a lot of our meetings have kind of resorted to being done online. So it's looking at, you know, what is comfortable? How do we support people? Yeah, maybe they only want to attend a meeting partially. Maybe they would prefer if the meeting was in person or online. You know, having those discussions with people. The worst thing that happens in busy agencies is people don't get agendas before the meeting, or they get them very late as well. And it's important that agendas are shared with people. People actually understand, you know, what is the agenda and can they contribute to the agenda as well. Make sure that we're telling people who else is going to be in the meeting. I think this is really a helpful one as well. If we're doing good preparation, you know, we talked about that with assessments, didn't we? Then can people perhaps who are feeling quite nervous, you know, write down what they want to say in advance, or if they're not, you know, literary, that somebody else could do that on their behalf. And do they have a right to an advocate? Will an advocate be there with them in the meeting? So these are some really important principles. Okay, what about in the meeting itself? So, you know, I've been in some meetings that have been very kind of formal, and there've been so many people in those meetings. And because my background was working with children and families, you know, I always felt that could feel quite intimidating for the people I was working with. So can we make sure they're the first in the room and they get to choose where they sit before everybody else comes along? Can the person chairing it make it really clear what some of the ground rules are? We need to try not to use the jargon, because all these agencies are so used to it, but it might not mean anything to people that are in the meeting. I think this is a really important one. So checking what has been said, with a person, but if they become emotional, responding to their emotion, not ignoring it, and being sensitive, person-centered again, isn't it? It's good sometimes to have a visual aid, so maybe a flip chart, so that everyone can see that, and that people's views, it says, are visible on the flip chart. I don't think we should ever be afraid to stop the meeting on somebody's behalf. If they're feeling overwhelmed, it's getting a bit much. I think that needs to be in the ground rules. That time, they can have a bit of time out. And if that was me, I'd be thinking, is there a safe space in the building where I can speak to them, come away from the meeting, and then come back into the meeting? I've been in meetings where there's been no refreshments. You're sitting in a meeting for hours. I mean, it's so basic, isn't it? Just to have some water or maybe hot drinks as well. If people get distressed, one of the most important things you can carry around with you as a social worker is packs of tissues, because people might need that. And like I said, is there a safe and a private place in that building? Okay, so moving on. As I said at the beginnings, you may have been interviewed by people with lived experience when you came on our course. And that is something that is absolutely expected, with agencies, with local authorities now as well, with recruitment and training of staff. So, people would contribute by being on interview panels, also developing training, job descriptions, and training other people to be experts by experience. So I'm probably going to give you an activity around that tomorrow when we next have a session. I'll explain that more at the end. Okay, so yes, of course, our regulator, Social Work England, expects us to do this, rightly so, with our admissions process. But I think every stage of the programme, and it talks about, again, co-production, being people with lived experience. So I have a role within our team, within our department, of being called the champion when it comes to working with people with lived experience. So I did some consultation with our colleagues with lived experience when we were changing the curriculum to get their views about what did they think was really important, to cover in our curriculum, and how we then should be delivering training. And obviously having people like Sarah Jane come along, Ceri today, they're experts by experience, and we're very privileged, aren't we, to have them contribute to your learning. Okay, so we've got another little video here, and this again is coming from NICE, but these guidelines were around people who have a learning disability. So I'm hoping that this video also is going to work. I think it will. Let's try that.
So if I had to explain to my friends what I do in the NICE committee, would be to keep it real. So I think that lots of people talk about what they should do for people in a very detached way. When I mean detached, in a way that isn't based on what is really happening at grassroots. And I think it's really important that people like myself and Paul that have lived experience keep it real and actually bring the experience of people like ourselves into the room and challenge, but challenge in a way that isn't just about challenging. It's about ensuring that we all can have a better approach and service for people.
Because people with learning disabilities don't very get opportunity to do this kind of stuff, and it's their experience to understand now, to put their views over it and help their friends and colleagues and all that.
I think that we should be heard so that people know that we're not just, shall we say, here making up the numbers. We're here to be heard so that we can talk and to make people think as well.
Well, yeah, I think, because I'd hate people to not have their voice, have their say, and some people are just brushed under the carpet. because they don't know where to go.
Support is key to being able to, for me personally, to participate in the meeting. So there's lots of pre-reading, lots of thinking through kind of some of the pre-information that's done supported by colleagues who have different experiences, but also an organisation called Paradigm.
We meet the day before and have a planning meeting, so we know what this meeting's about. And I think that's really helpful.
Yes, it's vital.
The other committee members have said how useful they found the pre-work that we've done, because what we will do is we'll go through all of the research, and we'll have easy to understand and easy read versions with pictures, and we'll talk through each point. And it's really important because everybody has a different kind of opinion, and it helps us as a group to understand what are the key messages that we need to present.
Come along and give it a go. I mean, we've achieved it.
Okay, I think I've got another slide that corresponds with this one. There it is. So some of the things that I think powerfully came out of that video echo some of the things that we had picked up earlier today about being heard. It's about people's voices. It's about people having their say. They said, you know, it really helps, doesn't it, to have a planning meeting the day before. So yeah, this corresponds with the guidelines that they co-produced. So that's just kind of telling us what the guidelines are, but let's get into some of the detail here. So we've got some direct quotes from people who've got learning disabilities who were involved with it. And they're saying, look, we've got more personal experience than the professionals have. Professionals can see it from the outside, but we have a view from the inside. We know about how hard it is, and we can say things that affect our daily lives. And somebody said it, didn't they, in the video? I want to be involved to make sure that we're not pushed under the carpets. There's some really powerful quotes there from people with lived experience. And I hope that the video, I mean, I really liked the flip chart, because they've got an artist, haven't they? They clearly had an artist in the room who was, you know, drawing images as well as the sort of text that went with that. And I think that visually really helps people. It captures people's imagination. They'll be using different colours. Like last week, you all had a go, didn't you, at doing a genogram, and some of you were all using different colour pens, and, you know, bringing a little bit of creativity to what we do as well. So the reflections from this activity, we're looking at strengths and limitations. So let's start with the strengths. That's what a strengths-based approach does. So what they did is they had an icebreaker, which was a picture version of bingo. So you might know that icebreaker, or you might have used other icebreakers in things that you've done. And that helps to, you know, get people moving around the room and talking to one another and finding out what people have got in common, maybe through that. The presentations were definitely in easy read type as well to help people. They made sure that there were regular breaks for people. We saw that the support workers created posters and flip charts that were both descriptive and engaging. This sounds good, doesn't it? They had jargon buster flip charts. I can imagine them saying, oh, you know, people keep using whatever acronym, and then actually, what does that mean? So that's probably what they were doing there. Ground rules. And really importantly, you know, if we're going to do these activities, then make sure people do, if it's going to be a day, not an hour, then, you know, people need lunch, don't they? They need food. So that is a very important consideration. And then let's look at the things that need to be worked on. Unfortunately, for people who are hearing impaired, the hearing loop was not working. So was there a backup? What could they do about that? Unfortunately, again, the paperwork was only sent out a few days before the meeting. That was difficult for people to have enough time to read it all. You've got one document that was easy read, but then you've got others that weren't. So that was a bit confusing. And again, the room was a bit hot. So, you know, that is not great either. So, yeah, we can only plan so much. And, you know, sometimes things won't go perfectly, but it's always about looking at it and saying, okay, you know, like here, what worked well, and what can we improve on the next time we do this. This time, we are going to focus on children and young people. So we have got a co-produced guide. It's from NICE as well. But the young people that were involved in this, they had experienced abuse or neglect in their lives. So what they did is they recruited 15 young people from all over the country, supported by an organisation called AVA, and they were given a task of developing some guidelines on child abuse and neglect. So how did they do that? By sharing their experiences, not of what had happened to them, but of what they did when they were looking for help. You know, they were trying to find support. What was that like for them? So they didn't have to talk about the abuse and neglect, but just the experience of trying to find help and support for, you know, for their needs. So that included, of course, the challenges they faced, as well as, well, what was positive and what worked well for them. So when they finished that, they decided that they wanted to write a quick guide for young people, to help other young people, because do young people know their rights in society? And we'd have to say, well, no. How are young people supposed to know, you know, what their rights are and what they're entitled to, especially when you're already in a position of being powerless and you've been abused or neglected? That is so difficult, isn't it, for that person? So that is why they said, no, we want to do some kind of, you know, user-friendly quick guide for young people. So what they did is there were two groups of young people working with AVA, and they designed a guide, and they agreed what the messages should be from the original guidance, you know, as in what are the most important things to highlight for young people themselves, and what was their aspiration. They said that they hoped it would help other people, other young people who might be in a similar situation, so that those young people could get help and support that they needed and they deserved. But they really needed co-production. They need the professionals to actually share this guide with the young people. Otherwise, how are the young people ever going to know about it? So that's co-production. And then here's a strong quote from the young person: you do not have to live in silence. You don't have to feel trapped or be alone anymore. So that was a really important piece of work that these young people contributed to. But we always have to worry, don't we? It's like, well, do enough professionals know about this to get the message out there to young people, to help young people? Because this potentially could be very empowering. But it's dependent, isn't it, on agencies to promote this guidance as well. Okay, just going to look at the time now. How much time? I want us to have a break at 10:30. We might have enough time to watch this video, because I've got another one right at the end as well. So this is TLAP again, and they went round interviewing adults of social services departments about co-production. So let me just go to the next slide. Oh no, yeah, that is the video. So we'll just see how long this is, because I also have one more video, I think, towards the end. So let's have a look at this one.
What have you done in Barnes in terms of co-production?
We've been working with service users and carers to rethink how we provide social care support to people with mental health difficulties. We have a co-lead for the project, so I have a professional staff member lead and I have a service user lead for the project, and between them they're leading a whole programme of work that is completely redesigning our mental health social work service to focus on enablement in mental health, on recovery, and particularly on the things that really matter to people. So a much greater focus on employment and housing and community and social inclusion.
During these times of austerity, it's been very difficult for service users and also for people within local authorities. How do you think co-production has helped that process?
I think it's absolutely pivotal, John. There isn't the wisdom within one single part of the system to answer all of the challenges that we face. So actually co-production with people in receipt of services, the wider population, with partners, is key for us going forward.
Can you give an example of how to avoid making costly mistakes by getting it right or better from the start through co-production?
We were about to buy a system to help people match themselves up with personal assistants, a personal assistant finder system. That was going to be a fairly expensive system. We looked at it and we thought it was brilliant. But then what did we know when we showed it to our colleagues on the Making It Real board who were representing? They found all sorts of reasons why we shouldn't do it that way. We should do it a different way. And that gave us a direct saving immediately on what looked to us to be a good system, but wouldn't have worked in practice for the people who would be wanting to use it.
What have you learned from working this way?
Oh, I've learnt loads. I think the most important thing I've learned is I talk jargon a lot. So reminding myself I need to talk in English in a way that my friends and my family and my dad and anybody can understand what I'm saying. I've also learnt that actually we don't know what we don't know. So I don't have a learning disability. I don't know what it's like to access a service. I don't know what it's like to receive a letter that I can't read. So because I don't know that, it's really important we get people who do know what those experiences are like involved in developing the work, because they see all of the things that people like me don't see.
I think the other thing that some councils have struggled with, and we struggled with for a time, was what is an outcome? And we have this discussion quite a lot in the council about what are outcomes and what trying to encourage people to say what is it they really want, and then what do we write down on the bits of paper. And I think what co-production's brought to us is really focusing on what outcomes are.
I've done loads of things, and we've done some really good stuff here in Solihull. But if you ask me what's the thing that I'm proudest of, it would be what we've done to promote the involvement of our experts by experience and to embed that whole ethos of co-production, not just in adult social care, but it's something that's accepted now across the council and also with our partners as well. And part of that pride actually is being immensely proud of those people who've worked with us who've actually then gone on to do other things as a result of actually being involved in the process. So it's been hugely beneficial to us as a council. But what I'm proudest of is actually the way that it's then supported the flourishing of a whole lot of other people as well.
What advice would you give to other directors on co-production?
I mean, I suppose the key thing for me is trying to get across to staff and our managers about what co-production is, because a lot of people think it is consultation. They do think it is, we've designed this terrific service, what do you think, yes or no? And that's not what co-production is.
Together, we end up with a much better way of working, and we understand more about what it is we're trying to do instead of guessing.
My advice, and to some extent my challenge to directors, would actually be to question themselves about whether they are truly delivering on a co-production ethos on the beginning of equals, and where people who use services are part and parcel of everything that goes on.
Isn't the important thing that we keep doing this? And we're all still learning, and we'll never get to a place where we think, okay, we've done it all. There is nothing more to be gained from co-production. I think, the next 5 years are potentially really exciting in terms of coming up with things that are really innovative and creative by working together.
Absolutely. And working together, learning from each other. And okay, hey, well, thank you very much for your time, Dawn.
You're
It was
welcome.
lovely to talk to you, and good luck.
Thank you.
So we really need people at the top of organisations, like the directors of adult social services, who have a lot of influence, to really sign up to, understand what co-production is and promote it within their local authorities or whatever organisations we're talking about. So a few of the things I've written from the video is, again, one of the people who was speaking, she said, she's really conscious that she uses too much jargon. She said, you know what, I need to adopt a way of speaking so that anybody can understand what I am talking about. And I mean, I'm sure all of us have sat in rooms and we thought, that has gone completely over my head. I had no idea if I come away from this now and I have to explain to somebody what has just been said, I would be completely lost. And so, you know, we've got to be able to communicate clearly and effectively so people understand what we're talking about. And then I think another director said, we don't know what we don't know. And I think what I take from that is the person-centered approach is trying to have the empathy and the understanding of what life is like for somebody else, but it isn't a substitute for second guessing, is it? So that is why co-production is so important, because you hear from the person themselves. We don't go away making assumptions and think, oh, I know that person with a learning disability is really going to benefit if we do this. Well, how do we know that if we haven't actually asked them and listened to them? And maybe we are completely wrong in what we think. So that's kind of, you know, what she meant by that, but actually listening to people, hearing from people, and actually it's not just the agenda then of the agency. And then I think somebody was talking about our outcomes, and that's a similar thing, isn't it? It's like, well, a local authority may say these are the outcomes that we're working towards, but is that actually what people want? So it's about hearing from people themselves about their outcomes. And then I think somebody else talked about, well, it's not just one organisation, but you need everybody involved in this to make it work, which kind of goes back to systems theory, that you need all the systems working together coherently if we're going to see any of these approaches work. Okay, hopefully I'm going to try and move away from this video. Let's see if it will allow me to do that. There we go, try again. Here's a question then. Well, what if people are, you know, not actually choosing to use our services, and they are compelled really to use services? So how on earth can you do co-production? How on earth can it be an equal partnership if people are compelled because of you know, statutory duties that are on local authorities, for example, detaining people under the Mental Health Act, or removing people's children, you know, because of child protection inquiries, section 47. And that is the example I want to look at now. This is the example we will finish with. So we've got somebody here who is called Safeguarding Survivor. That's her kind of tag on social media. And she says, as a birth parent who has experienced several concurrent sets of public law proceedings, that means she's been in court for not just one set of proceedings about one of her children, but maybe different sets of proceedings about various of her children, about whether they should stay with her or not stay with her, or being removed. And she said, I can safely say that during and directly after our interventions, the very last thing I would have wanted to do was co-produce as much as a cup of tea with a social worker. They were the enemy. They had taken my children away. And what research tells us about families involved in the child protection system is taking an active role in the co-construction of services. We don't really have, you know, that's not embedded in our services at the moment. And they said at best it's uneven. So we don't really have that many examples, but I have found one that is pretty much acclaimed, including by the government, who have recently looked at children's social care, including child protection. And this is Camden. So we're going to watch a little video from Camden. But what are they doing? So they're Safeguarding Children's Board. This is now it's 9 years ago. They encouraged something to be created, which is the Family Advisory Board. And who is that? That was a small group of parents, mums, dads, and grandparents who all had experience of the child protection system within Camden. And the idea was to learn from the family's experience about how can Camden be better and inform and improve their practice with families involved in child protection. So in 2016, they had a one-day training session where everybody came together, and they called it a bit like the exchange model that we looked at last week in the assessments. So exchanging views between people with lived experience of child protection service and children's social workers. And this is what Safeguarding Survivor, same person, didn't want to share a cup of tea with a social worker. She said, by the end, we weren't social workers and service users, we were just people. So So what they have developed is something called a family-led child protection inquiry. And that means that they use a participatory approach, and that is about the families themselves being involved. So co-production in the design, implementation, and recommendations of the inquiry. And a very important part of this is families having independent advocacy, and that should be offered to the parents at the beginning of a child protection process. And also using something called a family group conference, which we will talk about again when we look at the restorative approach. But this is different to a traditional child protection conference because you have a coordinator that works with the family themselves for the family to try to find solutions to keep their children safe within the family. So you have a family group coordinator, they've been trained around advocacy, and also, the people that have been offered the advocacy training then can be advocates for families in these child protection conferences. And they have a meeting called Helping Hands, and that's between a parent with experience of the child protection process and a parent who's right at the beginning. So that's kind of like a peer support, really, to help them, to engage with it. And again, the family group coordinator is very important in that. Then they get the feedback that they've gathered about this from the parents is positive, and that social workers also co-production, they also see it as positive because they think, and this is actually, the principle of advocacy is that it should help build trust and relationships. So it's relationship based. And so these types of advocacy support are a potential stepping stone to developing peer advocacy. And that's what their report was recommending. So let's have a look at a little bit more. And what they do is, it wasn't a one-off. They are so committed to this. And there's a social worker called Tim Fisher who's really been instrumental in all of this. So they meet monthly to have, again, exchange workshops with parents who share their experiences of things like domestic violence with practitioners. So again, the practitioners are going to learn a lot, aren't they, from the people with lived experience. They call something the 6 monthly free citizen-led international events. Yeah, they have been doing international events. I was having a look at some of their international events on YouTube. So they started doing that 5 years ago, and it's a parent and a social worker that co-lead on that and facilitate the whole day. And then also they're looking at the system and the structure, and they're saying, yeah, we need the child protection conference chairs and the quality assurance unit to be participating in this and to have their own discussions and conversations about how can we be more participatory in our approach. So less risk averse again, isn't it? And bring families into conferences first, as we saw earlier on, into the meetings, make sure they are comfortable. So the same kind of principles. So we are going to watch a little video now about what is the Camden conversations, what is different about this.
Camden Conversations, our family-led child protection inquiry.
I felt that my input was not only being heard, but was being truly listened to for the good of others.
As we say all the time, meaningful relationships are built upon trust and listening. And it's only through working together and taking that feedback on board that we can challenge the stigma attached to social workers in the community.
Like many other parents, I knew I wanted child protection to feel more supportive and less scary.
I feel that there is fear on both sides. So if we can get through this fear, we can move forward together positively.
I found this experience to be quite humbling.
I felt it was important for me, as a parent with experience, to be doing the interviews so I could ask the right questions and help the family members feel comfortable.
Through this review, we're opening up the feedback loop and publicising the views of families, and also being clear about how we're going to respond. In doing so, we're being accountable. I think that this is a significant step.
I learned so much being involved in this inquiry. It made me realise we have a voice that will be heard.
When people were asked questions during the inquiry, they often gave similar responses. A relationship works well when
you feel comfortable enough to open up and get the help that you need, and when people feel valued and respected.
You feel comfortable with the other person. There's trust and respect.
Camden Child Protection can change by
being human, stopping using words that make no sense to families, breaking boundaries and not being tied by tradition.
Changing the atmosphere, cutting the jargon. Who says it has to be the way it's always been?
Children need
love.
I had success the other day when
someone showed me genuine care and interest, and someone listened to me and explained to me.
I had a cup of tea with a parent and let them say what they wanted to. With my help, someone understood what was happening.
I think I am
a good person, patient, and doing my best.
A good person, kind, trying my best.
In an ideal world, a child protection conference would be
like a safe kitchen, an opportunity for the family to lead the plan, including advocacy.
More comfortable and make me feel less vulnerable, like a family group conference, giving more independent advocates for families.
Okay, so I hope that you can see from the video that, you know, even when we're working with children and families in child protection situations, which are very emotive and very stressful for everybody involved, we can be relationship based. They talked in that video about the importance of a feedback loop. So again, it's two-way, it's hearing from the families themselves and taking on board, you know, what can we do to improve services. They talked about being accountable. So accountability works both ways. So we're holding families to account for the care of their children and safeguarding, but also the families, the citizens can hold the local authority to account for, you know, its practice as well. It talked a lot again about voices and the importance of being heard. Somebody said, actually it was a professional, about being human. So I think, you know, we can argue that co-production is both person-centered and also relationship-based. Okay, so we just need to move on. So we're just going to wrap it up now so you can have a well-earned break. But I just want to finish with what are the strengths and limitations of co-production. So hopefully these slides and videos have helped us to recognise it is a very strengths-based approach. It's about breaking down the barriers between the people who are using the services and the professionals. It's about building on people's current capabilities. It is relationship based because it is about reciprocal relationships. It says, you know, people get something back having done something for others. So there is a mutuality there. People want to work together to achieve shared interest. It's also about peers being involved. And personal support networks as well as professional networks. Camden's a really good example of that. It facilitates services by helping organisations to become agents for change rather than just being service providers. So, you know, it's quite dynamic, isn't it, if it's done well? But like everything, it definitely has its limitations. So Peter Beresford, who is a professor in social work, I don't think he's retired because I see him still doing things. And he has lived experience of mental health. So he's been a really powerful advocate in the movement of people with lived experience sharing power. But he says, you know, co-production, it's a slow process. And sadly, you know, it's kind of like influenced, isn't it, by the politics of governments. So it's things like market forces, all the things that John talked to you about, neoliberalism. So he says, you know, it might just be a lot of rhetoric rather than actually practiced. It's just words, or maybe it's tokenistic. So other people actually still have got the power, haven't they, that make the decisions. What has changed really in the power structure? So he's given examples, whether it's about the NHS or welfare reform or education. So that's critical for you, isn't it? It makes additional demands on people who rely on services. So is it potentially exploitative of people and getting people to do more and agencies to do less? I'm being a bit cynical there. So yeah, could it be a cover for services are so strapped, aren't they, at the moment, when it comes to resources, that, you know, maybe it's kind of a convenient let out for services to withdraw. Does it lead to a postcode lottery? We've got a postcode lottery. We can go to different parts of the country and we're not going to get the same services everywhere. So we definitely are experiencing that. What about our existing structures and frameworks? Do they work against it? Remember what we said at the beginning about things being so heavily bureaucratized. Does that kind of go against the principles of co-production? So again, commissioning frameworks favour outputs rather than outcomes, because that's a lot easier to measure. It's harder sometimes to quantify. You know, if co-production prevents, like in perhaps the child family-led inquiries, is it more difficult to quantify its benefits? I mean, again, I think that social work, it's not just measuring things, is it? It's not quantitative. It's qualitative, I would argue. Does it only really suit smaller organisations, as in voluntary sector, third sector, that are less structured and less hierarchical? And is it difficult, if we've got small examples of success, is it hard to replicate that on a larger scale? So there's lots of questions there about co-production. And I'm just finishing with, what we want is for co-production to be transformative. But, you know, you've got then to have a power. The power has to be relocated. So we're talking about mental health services and people who are survivors of mental health. That's what Needham and Carr are arguing should happen, but power has to be redistributed. This is Khan, who's the person at the beginning that we were looking at. And so Carr's universal core values of co-production, they're radical, and they demand a fundamental critique and challenge of the way public services are run. I can't really argue with that, but I think you also have to look at the political structures and resources with that. They're particularly challenging for mainstream clinical mental health services. Importantly, Khan situates co-production as a means to work for social justice. And that's very important in social work, isn't it? Sorry, it shouldn't have done that. So yeah, those are the principles of co-production that we're being reminded of. And, you know, Khan's view about no more throwaway people. So can we get to that, given, the pressures that services are under right now? So redefining work, no more taking the social contribution of people for granted. So these are some of the challenges: reciprocity, stop creating dependencies and devaluing those whom you help while you profit from their trouble. So that's a strong critique there as well. So there is a feeling around sometimes that people with lived experiences are quite exploited by organisations to talk about what's happened to them in their lives, and that in itself is a bit of an industry for some organisations as well. And then what else have we got? Social capital. What is going on in society right now? Again, if you just put your news channels on every day, we can see that families are struggling, aren't they, more and more. And that's families and neighbours and communities, and that requires an investment. So it's the opposite of that, isn't it? If we defund public services, we've got schools on strike today, haven't we? If we defund our public services, then we're not building social capital, is the argument there. And that takes us to the end of this part of the morning. And what you're going to have now is a nice long break until 11 o'clock. So I'm going to pause my recording. If I can find that. There we go. No, that's the share, isn't it? I'll stop sharing, but I also want to be able to pause the recording. There we go. So if I just the recording, and then I just found our slides from our workshop last year, which were quite good because they give the students an idea of the kind of things you do. So I might share some of the slides when you're talking about things so people kind of understand what you're talking about, especially with your community interest company. But what we do, everybody, Ceri and I just tend to have a bit of a conversation. And Ceri and I have worked together now for, I'd say it's about 2 years. So we've obviously developed our relationship. We do lots of, this is one activity, but we've also been able to do other activities together, which has been brilliant. But in order to start today, Ceri, do you want to say a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Ceri Davies, BEM. I was born with complex disabilities, cerebral palsy, spinal bifida tethered cord and scoliosis. However, I've not let that stop me. I've got a degree in early childhood studies joint with sociology, a master's in youth and community work. From the age of 5, I knew that I wanted to set something up to help people. And that's exactly what I did. I knew from the age of 17 that I wanted to create a social enterprise. And if you go on to More Mascots, Please CIC, you'll see that there's a bunch of videos which I'm sure Nushra's going to show you shortly. But there's videos that explain why I've done what I've done. So I realised at the age of 17 that I like mascots, and by the time I was 19, I knew I wanted to start something. And then from 19 to my early 20s, the fundraising was going out of the West Midlands and out of Dudley, where I'm from, to one of my friends who I do it in memory of, because it was also in memory of my uncle who passed away in a tragic motorbike accident. I brought it back to the West Midlands with the help of Dudley Council for Voluntary Services, and I registered it as a community interest company in 2013. And then since then, we've helped well in excess of over 1,000 disabled, disadvantaged and life limited children and young people. And I employ young people as play workers to dress up in the mascots, learn to do the face painting, and it's often their first job. But me personally, I'm in the top 5% according to continuing healthcare, which is what I claim from the government for adult social care in the form of a personal health budget. I'm in the top 5% of the most complex people with disabilities to stay at home, and it's within the NHS agenda to ensure that people like me stay at home rather than having to go into nursing homes, which is what I'd have to do if I didn't have a personal health budget. A direct payment where I have a support provider and I manage my own adult social care.
So Ceri and everybody, hopefully you can see one of our slides from our workshop that Ceri and I did together last year, and we've got a very nice picture of you, Ceri, graduating, I think, and that's your mum there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my mum, bless her. That's when I graduated with my MA.
Yeah.
I know I've just said a lot of things fast, so if anybody who's new to social work doesn't know anything that I've just said, I am willing to explain, and anybody that hasn't heard of social enterprises before, I can explain whatever you need me to explain.
I'm just going to hopefully get to the next slide without it playing the video, because sometimes it does. There it is. So Ceri has spoken about her community interest company, and that first slide has got the details of More Mascots and the website. But these are some of your mascots, aren't they, Ceri?
They are, yeah. So you'll recognise these. But Batman is my cousin, and he's a stunt actor, so he's a stunt actor. And
I don't know if it's just my reception, but I think I've lost you, Ceri, and I don't know if other people can hear me. Yeah. Can people hear?
So he does all the fighting, and he plays with fire at Warwick Castle.
Yeah, because you had a day out at Warwick Castle, didn't you, over the summer?
I did, yeah. I went to see him, and I'll be going back this summer as well at some point. I just don't know when. I'll have to speak to him.
Okay.
And all the rest of these are young people who have come on my books, who it's been their first opportunity, their first job that they've done. The pretty young lady in the bell dress, she now works for Black Country Women's Aid.
Oh, wow.
Doing working with people who have been trafficked, doing an advocacy role for them. She's extremely busy and constantly. She's got a lot on her caseload, so she's done really well for herself.
I mean, it's amazing, isn't it, that you gave a lot of the young people their first opportunity and work, and it must be really satisfying to see them go on and build their careers and, you know, make a difference in our communities.
It is, yeah. I could get a job as a professional reference writer. Done that many.
I can imagine. So what I'm going to ask you about today, Ceri, is one of your passions of many, of course, about co-production. So the first question I have is, when did you first hear about co-production?
It was in the pandemic when I was getting frustrated because my mascots weren't going out so much. And for a long time, from a young teenager, I've experienced a lot of discrimination in employment where I wouldn't be chosen because of how disabled I am. And when I was much younger, I was briefly involved with a charitable organisation called Include Me Too. And that's when I heard about Clinton for Hargison MBE, who is one of the biggest change makers for adult social care. And I knew if I was going to build myself and get into employment and get more well known and be in the disability rights movement, he would be the one to contact. So I contacted him, and he was very gracious. It got me involved straight away with his community interest company, Community Navigator Services, and he's helped me open a lot of doors where I could prove myself, and I've ended up with a lot of different lived experience roles, and I've done a lot of work in co-production that without contacting another disabled person would never have happened, because discrimination levels are so high. I wanted to come out after I finished my degrees. I wanted to go into full-time graduate employment, but between a mixture of discrimination and my health, that has not, things haven't worked out that way for me.
So you've really had to pave your own way, haven't you, Ceri, because of all the barriers and all the discrimination that exists in society that you're talking about?
Yes, disabled people to get any form of recognition or notice at all always have to work doubly hard compared to their peers, and they're often only given paid roles when it comes to co-production and within the disability rights movement. Even though I've got 2 degrees and I'm a qualified youth worker, mainstream employment just didn't want to know. So I knew I had to look at things and take a step back and involve myself within the rights community. And now I'm closer to disabled people than I've ever been, and I've done more paid work than I ever have trying to go down the able-bodied route.
I mean, we've still got such a long way to go, haven't we, Ceri, when it comes to discrimination in society against disabled people. And I think, you know, the fact that you are somebody who is an activist, who's, you know, actively trying to challenge the discrimination and say to people, just because someone's got a disability doesn't mean they can't hold, you know, whatever job role it might be.
Yes, I am, and I'm passionate about doing that. And I think as social workers, you need to understand that that's the case. The person that you're going to assess is not an object or a thing. They're a person. They're somebody's sister, someone's auntie, someone's mom, someone's partner. And often because I'm on continuing healthcare, and often when you do go through that process, all of that, you as a person, is completely ignored.
I mean, that's so important because, you know, through this module that we're doing on theories and methods, we're talking about being person-centered, and we're saying you've got to see the person first, like you just described, that, you know, you're an auntie, you're somebody's daughter, you're somebody's cousin, you're somebody's sister. You know, you have so many, like we all do, we've all got different identities in society, but not just seeing somebody in terms of a diagnosis or, you know, whether a disability is hidden or more visual. So I think you've really summed that up for us really well about, well, that's where we need to be as social workers, that we don't just see people according to a service and assessment, but we're seeing the person, aren't we, Ceri?
You need to see the whole holistic person, and everybody deals with a life differently, and it's about being personal to that person. I'll warn you now, you'll have a lot of battles, and managers above you will not want you to spend money on people that need support. Will only want you to spend money on physical support. They'll be less concerned with holistic well-being and overall achievement of that person. But if I wasn't busy and doing things with my life, then mentally I wouldn't be able to cope. And I know throughout the movement and all the friends that I've got, then we also feel the same. That's why I'm supportive of Social Care Futures as well. And it's important for people like me to have role models. Like Clinton's a massive role model to me because he's got his own community interest company. He works full time on a very big wage because he's worked so hard to get there. And I know that if it's possible for him to get there, then one day it will be possible for me to do so.
Absolutely, Ceri. So a question I want to ask you is, what difference do you think co-production makes to services and the lived experience of people?
Absolutely essential. I'd talk about, I'm presuming that Nushra's talked about the Tilap video with you and the ladder that Tilap use. So we want to get towards the point where we're equal partners in the decision making, in what affects our lives. You know, I think it's James Charlton 2000 says it's nothing about us without us, and that's the emphasis of the disability rights movement. You know, you wouldn't ask somebody else to choose a dress for you to go out clubbing. So why as a social worker would you put in a package for someone without asking them? And it needs to go above consultation, and people need to be working in equal partnership, in proper co-production with the people that are on their caseloads. I know it won't be easy, and I know it's a huge challenge, but you need to really try your best and become advocates to your managers for the families that you serve. And believe me, there's so much need out there for families. It's it's simply a case of knowing what to do first.
And also,
Not
Ceri,
what you're already experiencing.
sorry. Also, Ceri, I know that we're both very aware of the personalisation agenda. It's a very big agenda in adult social care, and it's something again that the Care Act really promotes. And you're a big fan of personalisation, aren't you? Why is that?
I am, absolutely. Because I come from a family where I haven't been seen as any different, and I was brought up to achieve exactly the same as my sister, but I've realised now it needs to be in a different way. So that's why personalisation is so important to me, because I'd struggle to cope mentally if I couldn't control my own life. And that to me is why personalisation is so important, because what fits one person certainly won't fit another. I think that's the key with personalisation. And two, care needs to be care as well. You know, you need to think about other ways round rather than just traditional agency care. You know, and it's not just the elderly either that need social care. Children need social care as well. And I think I want to leave you with that message.
I mean, you made some really good points earlier on about, well, nobody wants to live a life where you're isolated. And you also said, you know, if you weren't doing all the things that you were doing, if you weren't linking up and connecting with all the people that you connect with, and that is your family, that is your friends, that is, you know, other people and professionals and organizations, you said, you know, that would impact your own mental health, which I totally agree with, because you know, we all need to have good well-being in our lives, don't we?
Yes, absolutely. And well-being for me personally, it's been busy and getting on with life without that, because I'm so physically dependent on others for everything, but switched on mentally. I like to keep myself busy and active.
And I think that's true of us all, isn't it? I mean, everybody that's here on this Zoom call, you've all made a commitment to want to train to be social workers, which is a big commitment and, you know, a lot of motivation to actually do that. But, you know, that will be so important to all of you and give you a sense of purpose about what you want to do in your lives, which is kind of what Ceri's saying about her own life and how Ceri makes a difference in her community and with the people that she's working with. So what I'm going to ask you, Ceri, a question about social workers. I know you have experience of having social workers, but in your opinion, what do you think makes a good social worker?
Somebody that is very committed, can turn up when they go home. Somebody with good listening skills. Somebody that writes down all their notes, because at the end of the day, whatever you're doing could end up in court. Somebody that says if they work for a child and there is a major safeguarding issue, that they fought management to remove children if they felt that was the right thing for their professional training. Somebody that shows empathy. Somebody that visits the people they look after, the clients they look after. Because I've not seen my own social worker in 3 years. I only see everybody deteriorate, and there needs to be a budget increase.
I mean, that's shocking, Ceri. Do you remember when we had that conversation last Friday when we did this session for our social work apprentices, and people in the room were absolutely shocked, weren't they, when you said, I have not seen my social worker for 3 years? You know, how does that make you feel?
Well, not good really, and I know it's not her fault, but sometimes she has periods of illness and they don't even tell me who's gonna cover.
Yeah. So it's not person-centred at all, is it?
No.
I know that Ceri wants to ask everybody, so I think I should stop sharing so it's easier for us to see one another. But you've got questions, haven't you, for our students today, Ceri?
I have, yeah. Just get them. Can't quite remember them. I should remember them by now, shouldn't I?
I think the first one, Ceri, yeah, this is a brilliant question. So we're focusing on all of you as students and your experiences so far of the course. I think that was your first one, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, how have you found your training to become social workers? So, seeing as it's online, would Jordan like to say something?
And other people can put things in the chat as well, but we want to hear from you.
Yeah. Just going where it's a bit more quiet. Yeah, I feel like the experience of the course is I feel like although it's training to be a professional, I feel it really sets you up to be a good human being as well. That's what I've enjoyed about it, and learning how to reflect appropriately and things like that.
That's really good to hear. What do you think, Ceri?
Yeah, could you tell me how it's made you a better person?
Sort of like a deeper understanding of emotions and behaviors and ways of working and mechanisms of life. Yeah, I've enjoyed sitting down and reading and learning and interacting with other people and like-minded people, all of it really.
You're a good advert. Sorry, Ceri, you go ahead.
Sorry, Nushra, that's good then. And do you work with adults or children?
I'd like to work with adults. Although one of the boxes is like children and adults learning disabilities. I work with people with learning disabilities at the moment, so that might be something I might prioritize. I might put higher in the list, but I'd like to focus on adults.
That's good then. I'd advise that you do a children's placement as well though before you qualify.
Yeah.
And then you'll definitely know.
Yeah, I'll reflect on that. Thank you. Yeah.
That's very, very helpful advice, Ceri, because the students at the moment, correct me if I'm wrong, you're writing out placement applications and you're, telling the person who's going to find you a placement in September what you've already done, what some of your, maybe you've been to college or sixth form, or you might have some work experience, and then you're giving some idea about what you would like. I know you don't get total choice about this, about what kind of placements you might be going on. So it's good to have your advice on that, Ceri.
Yeah, I think it's important to do both.
I think you're absolutely right, and we want all our students to recognise that social work, as you said earlier today, it's about working with children and adults. Would anybody else like to tell Ceri about your experience so far of our course?
I can see, is it Yantu? Is she online? Have I pronounced your name wrong? Probably because people pronounce my name wrong all the time. I'm very sorry.
You can call me Marge if that is
Okay.
because a lot of people do call me Marge. My colleagues call me Marge. The management, they call me Marge. So I'm not really fussy about the name because I know it's not a very familiar name.
Yeah, I'll call you Marge then, if that's okay.
Yeah. Right.
So what do you think about the course, Majanati? How, what are your impressions of it?
Well, so far, I think, my impression, the way I came into, study the social work wasn't quite the impression I had initially about the social work. But now it has widened my experience and horizon to understand that, social workers are not the way they were portrayed before I came into the course, and the passion, because I see some social work come to my, what the place of work to make assessment, and then it has given me, the passion to want to emulate them, but again, seeing, how social workers are are viewed, coming to remove and separate children and all these things. Now I have come to realize that they do it with a reason, really. Yeah, so it has really given me, that drive to want to research more, and the passion, it has given me to want to, really qualify and get on the practice, because the one thing one thing I'm interested in is, being an advocate, social justice advocate. And by that one-to-one with people, it gives me that opportunity, to know more about the person and to engage them more, when it comes to an assessment of need.
Yeah, that's very good. Do you work with adults or children?
I work with adults, actually, and I work with enablement, and I like enablement team. So we take referral from social workers from the hospital for, like on a discharge team. When people are discharged from the hospital, we enable them for a couple of weeks. Yeah.
You should really look up community navigator services, Clinton CIC, and his business partner Robert, because they really write a lot on social justice and what it means to be an advocate, because Robert is a trained advocate for people with learning disabilities. He did that for many years, and he's so passionate about rights. Robert is. He does a lot of protesting, but generally look up community navigator services, because what they've done is amazing. And if you follow Clinton on Twitter or LinkedIn or anything like that, it'll always try and get people to think outside their box and have a higher conversation about what social justice actually is. So that's my recommendation to you if you're passionate about social justice. So it's at Clinton F. They tweets a lot.
Okay. Yeah.
What I'll do, because Ceri and I did a workshop together, and I've got the slides, I'll share the slides when we finish our little conversation where Clinton is featured, and we might even have time to look at a video that we never even got to play at the workshop, which me and Ceri are really disappointed about. So might be able to do that as well. But does anybody else want to answer Ceri's question about how you are finding this training to be social workers? Anybody else want to answer that? If not, sorry, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I'll say something. Hi, Ceri.
Hi.
So I can't have my camera on. But I work for a local authority, and what I think I found with doing the course is that I feel like in theory, social work is such a good thing, and we want it to do certain things, but then actually in practice, what I'm seeing on the ground doesn't quite correlate. So it's like a lot of the theories and stuff that you want to implement and you want to do, you can't because of maybe like government policies or lack of funding and all those kind of things. So I can see the frustration of especially ASYEs that I work with at the moment but I've learned this in uni, and then coming to try and implement what I've learned like in its entirety is a little bit different. So I find that quite interesting.
Yes. Has Nushra gone on to different, I'm not sure she has because you first years, has she gone on to all the different cases that she discusses with co-production?
I suppose what I'd say, Ceri, and Tanya as well, and everybody. So Ceri and I did this session last week. This is really going to sort of hit a familiar chord, I think, Tanya, with your experiences working in a local authority with newly qualified social workers, because our apprentices are also working in local authorities, either with adults or with children. And they were expressing that same frustration that you speak about, which is, here you are at university and we want you to know all about, the best things about social work in challenging environments, and how you can, try to hold on to those social work values. And even though it's about power, isn't it? And it's saying, well, the organizations and the structures are designed in such a way that, even Ceri, you were saying as well, that, it's really difficult, isn't it, within these structures to be truly, working with the principles of co-production. So I think that's always my position. And I will always say to our students, it's like, this is what we know we need to be doing in social work. Okay, we're not going to throw all of this away and say, well, we give up, because actually out there it's so challenging that it's going to be really difficult to do that, because otherwise we are just giving in to really oppressive cultures. But we also have to say, but those cultures exist, don't they? They are real, and it is very challenging. And how can you, in whatever little corner of the world you occupy and wherever you work, still try to make a difference in people's lives, in spite of, all the things that you've said, Tanya, and, other people would argue this as well, that these are very challenging times, aren't they, for our services and for social workers and social care workers. So that's the position, Ceri, that we're trying to say, when everybody's going on placement, most of our students, because a number of our students have come back from placement last year in September, and that would be what all of you will be doing when you're second years. So our second years are now back at university, and our master students and our final year students who did their final placement. And even though it is very challenging, it is very tough out there, most of our students, I'm pleased to say, have had positive experiences, of being on placement and doing, good social work. So that's how I view it, I guess. Ceri, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think co-production is relative to each family that you support. So you might not have thought that you made a difference, but if you set sort of smaller steps, then you'll be surprised what difference you have actually made. But I know that you are, because of government policy and because of lack of funds, etc. I absolutely take what you're saying as that will be a reality. But if you use what Nushra's trying to teach you and try and put that into your active practice, then you will make a difference.
I think it's also what you said, Ceri, about social workers are advocates, aren't they? And that we need to be advocates when we're working with people.
Yes, absolutely. Encouraging self-advocacy, and then also being an advocate when you're representing them in front of management, and management really don't want to give you that funding to help that person.
So does that mean, Ceri, that social workers need to have a lot of knowledge about policies, would you say, and legislation?
Oh yes, absolutely. You need to have knowledge on about policy, about legislation, and where the government sits. That's what I think personally.
So this is the point where we will throw the floor over to all of you, and you can ask Ceri questions now about anything really that Ceri might have spoken about. Ceri also, as she said earlier on, you know, Ceri is reliant on often private agencies. Is that right, Ceri? When it comes
to
that's
correct.
Yeah.
And the standard of care is very inconsistent and very low.
And sometimes you've been let down, haven't you, Ceri?
I have, yeah. I've had to report to the local council and CQC. Yes, because of my complex needs, I've probably had over 20 agencies. 33 now, and probably 20 agencies since I was 18. So can you imagine what that's like for my family? Basically, sometimes we don't know whether we're coming or going.
And sometimes your family have had to step in, haven't they, when the service hasn't turned up for you?
Yes, yeah.
And I know that's put a lot of stress on your family as well, hasn't it?
It has, yeah, because my parents have got their own health conditions. When I did a conference with Nushra, my PA, she wasn't very well, and my dad had to have the day off work to bring me. So it was an important conference and I needed to attend.
Yeah.
And I couldn't let Nushra down. So my dad actually lost the earnings from work that day to take me.
And, you know, we were very grateful that your dad brought you, because we were also, it was a conference for the whole of the West Midlands, because, you know, we've got a social work teaching partnership. So the work that Ceri does is so important, not just for students, but also for social workers, practitioners, senior managers. You know, that is the teaching partnership. So we were at Birmingham University last year in July, and we were just sharing our experiences, Ceri and me, of how we see co-production and how we try to teach co-production at Coventry University. But, you know, people don't fully appreciate that, as Ceri said, you know, life can be really complicated. And when you're relying on different services and they don't show up, and not only is that frustrating, but there are issues there about power, aren't there, Ceri? Because you could be an employer, because you are an employer, and you can have direct payments, but that's not necessarily meaning you get what you need, is it?
No. You know, the system isn't clear cut. Just because you've budgeted someone for a direct payment doesn't mean that you've solved all their needs, and then the case should be just far from it, to be honest. And recruitment takes a long time, and often support providers, I'm with a good one now, but support providers don't do the job that they promise people with need, and they tell social workers that they're doing. Often they lie and deceive social workers, because it's not about people, it's just about profit.
How can local authorities, because we were looking at, you know, content today, and we were looking at lots of stuff we know from research and from evidence. And one of the most important things was listening to people and hearing people's voices. But that process you've described suggests that the providers might be believed if they're saying, oh yeah, we're providing a fantastic service, but from your perspective and other people's perspective, it isn't fantastic. It's not good enough, you know? So there's an issue of power there, isn't there?
Yes, private providers are always believed over families. I've found it time and time again since I've had to receive adult social care, and my mum had it so much when I was a child, because my mum and dad had to advocate for me, and it was simply just assumed that I would go to special school, and that was something they didn't want for me, because they knew intellectually I could cope within a mainstream environment. So I was one of the first, one of two young people to go to mainstream at the age of 5. So I'm 33 now. So that was a long while away, and that was a hell of a battle. And you know, I always had to have reviews, and I constantly had to prove myself, to the point where one of my bosses once in youth work said to me, you know what, Ceri, you've achieved everything now. There's nothing left for you to prove to us anymore.
And it's sad that you know, society has got so much prejudice that you are placed in a position of having to prove yourself when you shouldn't have to prove yourself. And I mean, I can think about, you know, the experience of people with various disabilities, which can lead to a bit of a segregation, can't it, Ceri? Like you've described, that, well, why shouldn't you be at mainstream school along with other children? Why should you be somewhere else? You know, what was that assessment based on? It's because of your parents, though, isn't it, Ceri, that they said, no, actually, you know, we're not accepting this for our daughter because we know she'd be fine. It's about it's like the social model of disability, which I know that you feel very strongly about as well. It's like, it's society that discriminates and causes the barriers, isn't it, when it comes to anybody having whatever type of disability. You know, it's often the barriers are constructed, aren't they, by the processes?
It is, yeah. My parents fought tooth and nail to keep me in mainstream, and eventually, over the time, with support, I managed to prove that I was intellectually and socially able to stop in mainstream school and mainstream society.
Does anybody want to comment or ask Ceri any questions? I don't want to dominate here. Anybody, any thoughts about what Ceri's just shared with you? I think Ceri said something really important, actually, because you are the next generation of social workers. So just going back to the providers, I think the message I've taken, Ceri, is, you know, don't just believe what providers tell you. This is, again, about people's voices, isn't it? About people actually receiving services. Find out from them if, you know, it's real. Just because the provider says, yes, we're doing everything that's expected, that might not be somebody's experience. It hasn't been Ceri's experience. I think that's a really important message that all of you can actually put into practice, you know, and ask those questions and have professional curiosity to make sure that people are getting good quality services. And what we should always think about is, well, what would you like if it was you? What kind of service would you like? You know, what would that look like?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, private providers will sometimes tell fibs to social workers. So you always have to ask the person who's receiving the service, because for them, it's just about profit. And that's where the problem lies. You're not seen as a person that wants to achieve everything that everybody else would achieve, just seen as a money-making exercise, really.
And that's very dehumanizing, isn't it? Because again, we all want to be treated as human beings, you know, that is our right, isn't it? It's about human rights and not being treated as less or just a number. That's another number, isn't it? That you've got to go out and do X, Y, and Z, and maybe not do it very well. But the minute we start having that mentality, then, you know, that's where oppression and abuse can take place, can't it? In our services. So it's really important, you know, to have those values in social work. Oh, Jordan's got his hand up.
Yeah, I've got a question about when you're seeking guidance on how to maximize your own rights and your own needs, wants. I just wondered what role models or what sources of information did you try and seek out in order to back up your needs and wishes, if that makes sense?
I knew it was quite simple that the world wasn't being equal for me, and if I wheeled in for anything, say a job, and my sister who's able-bodied wheeled in for the same job, then my sister who's able-bodied would get the job over me. So I knew the only way I was going to get round it was to join the disability rights movement, right, and get involved within lived experience. And that's why I contacted Clinton, and that's why I got involved with community navigators that I've already mentioned. Yeah. I knew that was the way, and then since then I now teach co-production at various universities. I'm involved with various national projects, so I knew that the rights movement was was the way forward for me, because I knew I would be equally accepted by other disabled people, and I knew the mainstream world wasn't going to understand, because they don't see me as Ceri, they just see me as somebody, to put it bluntly, somebody in a moulded chair with a headrest. And because I did this, I now do more work than I've ever done. I'm now in a better social enterprise club, and I'm now a lot happier as well, because I can see things moving forward instead of moving backwards, and I don't feel so on my own.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Having that community that understands other people in similar positions or people that have that knowledge and understanding. Yeah, it's important. Thank you.
I mean, Ceri has, you know, really challenged people's thinking and maybe stereotypes. And that first slide I put up, there's a video, and I'll put it on Aula, you can watch it later on, where Ceri's not just on that video, lots of people are on the video. There are people from Dudley Council, you know, there are many different people from the community, and they're just saying, look, and your friends as well, Ceri, and your family, but just talking about what you've done and the difference that you've made. And I think that's for all of us, isn't it? Because you all would like to become social workers, and I'm sure that all of you have got a inbuilt determination to want to see a better society, you know, because we know what the problems are. but it's having that real sort of vision, I would say, because I think you've got a really good vision, Ceri, about what society could look like, rather than how society is. And I see that in the work that you do, you know, with your community interest group. That's just one thing that you do. There's so many things that you do. And that's what we all need, is to have a vision, to hold a vision. So even listening to Tanya and saying, do you know what, it is really tough because, you know, services are not where they should be. But I think we do have to hold a vision about, yeah, but we're not accepting this. We don't agree with it. And like you said, Ceri, you just joined the disability rights movement so that you weren't just one voice on its own, but, you know, you joined other people that are like-minded. And I think that's where we have to be in social work with all our colleagues and our allies, you know, because that is how we can make a difference and make a stand when there are things that we think, well, that these things are not right. What are we going to do? Because we have frustration. I'm just wondering if I can get the slide up of Clinton, Ceri, and maybe this time we can actually watch a video that we couldn't when we did the conference in the summer.
Yes, that would be a good idea.
I'm going to try and do that, everyone. So here's our slides. So let me just share, and then let me just sort of work backwards now to get to, if it will let me do it. You never know with technology, do you? Oh, it's going the other way. Right, I wonder if it will go to the beginning. I wonder if it will do that. That is, where is he now? He is definitely further up, isn't he? There he is. There's Clinton. Let's see if we can watch this then.
Bring me sunshine.
Today, I would like to dare you to consider our radical idea. It's called being human, that I hopefully will catch up. And this simple idea is about people, relationships, and lives. And we can do this through personalisation and a quirky idea of co-production. It may appear quite simple, but can offer a privileged insight and understanding and draw on our own experiences to help others. And I would describe myself as an optimist by nature. This isn't the same as being positive. Positive is finding the light in the now, and an optimist is seeing the light in the always. I just firstly want to thank Anna for describing her experience, because there's a lot of people out there when I come into contact with people who use services, carers and family members, some of how they describe the system. They use, I constantly hear words like, it's a battle, it's a fight, it's a war with engaging with the local authority. Okay, I use an analogy of a house plant to describe how the care system can make you feel. And if you will, I'll share the analogy with you. I think about a house plant, if you think about a house plant, it gets watered, it gets fed. If you're lucky, the house plant might even be talked to, you know, having a conversation, then put on a window ledge, hopefully get some sunlight in to help it nurture. That is how the care system can make you feel. That's how most people describe it. That's surviving. That's not thriving. So that's that's how it can make you feel. So my reflection would be, it's what unites us, and only a diverse movement can drive the change we want. And we are, and I use the wrong we are society. And part of the element of that is co-production is essential. And for me, there's 4 building blocks for co-production. One is about values, and values are the deepest, at the deepest level, are personal being values, and they are what is most important to us. And values are used to determine how we spend our time, how we evaluate the time we spend, and most importantly, we are always fully aware of our values. And clarity of value is an essential supporting tool to understand that. And if you think about it, it can be an asset in times of darkness and ambiguity if you know your values, because it can set the intention of the words, thoughts, and behaviours. And aligning that will hold more importance to us if we understand that. So, my second building block, Anna talked about power, sharing power. Who gets to make the decisions? How do we relate to one another? Who has power over? Who has power with? Power is the most commonly understood as a form of authority, control, or domination. So those with authority over others are considered powerful, while those who are dominant are seen as, powerless. I would be seen as powerless within the system. And this kind of power, we don't really talk about it, and we don't really understand it. The third one of the building block is about language. The language we use is very, very powerful, and it changes over time or doesn't. Let's look at an example, words like service user. Is it fixed or does it evolve? Language is that powerful because words carry so much weight. Think of something you've read or that has moved you, or a speech you heard that had some inspiration, or think of an insult or negative remark you've heard. It all carries emotion with it. And then my fourth building block is diversity. And what I mean about diversity, the power of diverse thinking. And there's a quote called, great minds think unalike. And diversity of minds we need to engage with. We tend to surround ourselves with people who we might identify with in appearance, beliefs, or perspectives. But there's a proverb called, birds of a feather flock together. But the truth is that birds of a feather that flock together significantly hinder the success of co-production. The problem with the bird of a feather flock together is that it creates collective blindness. So the key point for co-production is, one, an awareness of voices both central and marginalised. Two, all views are important as facts or opinions. And three, respectfully disagreement is healthy when we talk about co-production. So the movement must have people with lived experience at the centre and alongside a wide range of allies in this room, commissioners.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there. Oh my God. Sorry about this. It's always going wrong, isn't it? My technology stuff. But Ceri, it'll be really good if you have the last word today. Is there anything you want to say before we all say goodbye to one another?
I'd wish you all the very best. I'd say stick to the values that you're taught about being positive within social work. That good social workers have the best heart. And if you can think about Clinton said about co-production and about the house plant and about the fact that we all need feeding, just because you're disabled, it doesn't mean that you need anything less. And always think of that when you're assessing people and looking at the value of their direct payment or their personal health budget or whatever service you're delivering through social services or the NHS. Because at the end of the day, the NHS was set up to provide welfare and support all those years ago. And don't let privatisation take over the original findings of the NHS.
And there's really one thing I forgot to ask you, which is so important. If you look at Ceri's title, it says Ceri Davies, BEM. What's a BEM? Why do you have that?
It's an honour from the Queen. It was for running more mascots, please, CIC, for raising over £63,000, despite how disabled I am, and doing all the management of the young people, setting it up and helping all the children and families that I have done.
And you got that during, or was it just after the pandemic?
Yeah, I was in the 2020 birthday honours, and I received it from John Crabtree OBE. And then because of the pandemic, I couldn't go to the palace till a lot later.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, congratulations for that. And I'm going to put the video that you saw on the slide on Aula, so you can have a look at, you know, some of the things that Ceri does and the difference that she makes. But even though we're on Zoom, we can say thank you to Ceri, can't we? So does everybody want to do that? Just say thank you, Ceri. Really, thank you so much for coming today and just sharing, you know, your experiences with us. And I'm really hoping that all of you, because I know it's the first time that you've really come across co-production, just listening to Ceri and hopefully some of the content on the slides will encourage you and inspire you to do co-production in social work as best you can and wherever you can. And tomorrow I will set up an activity for the hour that we normally have, which will be about co-production. But Ceri, as ever, it's been such a pleasure to hear from you today. And Ceri and I are doing something very special, aren't we, next week on International Women's Day?
Yes, we're speaking at Basra at the University of Wolverhampton to the British Association of Social Workers.
So what I'll do is I'll put something on Aula for all our students, just in case there are some students that actually live out that way. But, you know, for anybody who wants to come and join us that evening, you'd be really, really welcome. But thanks everybody for your time today. See you next week, Ceri, and have a great afternoon, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ceri. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
The house plant needs more than a bit of water.
A plant needs more than a bit of water. Yeah, if you see some of my plants, that is definitely true. Thank you so much, Ceri, and I'll see you next week.
Take care,
Thank you,
Nushra.
everybody.
See
Thanks
you.
a lot. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.